Okay, Rob, here's your video on how I trim a brisket. This brisket came from Sam's Club, and it's one of their Angus choice briskets. I've had pretty good luck with these. They're not super expensive compared to Prime. Obviously, Prime is Prime, and it's going to taste better. But yeah, this is the Sam's Club Angus choice. So I've got a cutting board, and you'll notice I've got a bowl that's next to the cutting board, and that's where I'm going to be putting my brisket trims. And I save the brisket trim. Sometimes I will incorporate that into sausage. In this case, I'm going to render it down for tallow, and I do use the tallow in my briskets when I smoke them. I use it when I finish the brisket. When I wrap it, I put some tallow in there and let it rest with the tallow in there. It gives it a little more fat. So here we are, we're looking at the brisket. This is the flat end, okay? You can see this side here has got some brown meat. It's just basically where they cut it at the processing plant, and it's just been oxidized a little bit there. It won't hurt you, but we're going to trim that off. So that would be the flat and then the point. The point is to your right as you're looking at it. This is the lines of the grain that are going towards the flat there. Something to keep in mind, so when it's time to trim the brisket and serve it, you're going to want to cut it against the grain. So note where the grain is running. We'll look at that again. Do you see this chunk of meat hanging off of there? When you get these cryo bags and you open them up, sometimes you get surprises like that, and no fun, but you got to take it off, but we'll use it. This thing here that I'm pinching and holding up is called the mohawk. And in order to keep this thing aerodynamic so we'll get good even airflow, I'm going to take that and cut it off of there. Now I'm pinching it up. So I'm kind of pulling it up, separating it. And now we're just going to basically slice it off with the knife. And if I didn't mention it for anybody else watching this, I didn't say this is how to trim a brisket. This is just how I trim a brisket. And I'm sure there's probably 2,000 videos on YouTube on how to trim a brisket. And I'm not trying to claim I know what I'm doing. I'm just saying this is how I do it. I'm not serving it for competition or anything. This is just going to be a brisket for some friends coming over this weekend, and I'm looking forward to that. So we've got that mohawk off, and it reveals a big thick area of fat underneath, so you can work some of that out. And at this point, I'm just going to be trimming off some excess fat. If I determine it's excess, I'm going to get it off of there. But again, my trim is not as aggressive as some. And of course, I may trim more than others do. But here I am just working through some of that layer of fat that was underneath that mohawk. And mostly I'm trying to get it aerodynamic and smooth. And you can see after I cut it, I'm kind of checking that with my hand. I'm feeling that it's smooth. Here I am rounding off the point, the ball end, or if you're down in Texas and you order brisket at a restaurant, they're going to say, do you want lean or fatty? Well, the fatty end is going to be the point and the lean's going to be the flat. Now we're going to look at some of this really thick fat on the brisket here. There's just too much of this to render down in the cook. And remember that we're trying to do a few things when we cook this brisket. We're trying to cook moisture out of the meat, and we're trying to render fat, and we're trying to achieve a certain level of tenderness. And so you just want to get off excess fat. Now, I've got a little bald spot there. I try not to do that. I try to leave a little fat on there because this is the fat side, but it's really no big deal. If you have a bald spot here and there, it's not the end of the world. Don't fret, but try to keep fat covering everything as best as you can on the fat side. And while I'm trimming away here and you're watching that, something else to bring up. There are endless debates on fat side up, fat side down in your smoker. And I don't get too worked up about it. All I do is I say, that fat makes a good barrier for the heat. So if my smoker is heating from the bottom, such as my Yoder pellet smoker heats from the bottom, I'll put this fat side down if I'm cooking it on my pellet smoker. If it's in my wood burner or my offset stick burner, it heats from the top, so I'll put fat side up. I just basically look at the fat side as a way to protect the meat from the heat going on in there while you're trying to get that first stage done of achieving the color, okay? So no big deal, personal preference. So we're looking at that, and that's a big, thick, you can feel it, okay? You'll know the fat you need to remove because it's really hard. It's hard as a rock. And if you've ever processed a deer out in the field, there's some big, thick fat like that out that gets on their hindquarters and areas like that that you trim off when you're making your steaks and things. And so this is kind of like that. You can tap it with your knife and hear it. It's pretty hard. So we're going to take some of that out. And now I'm trimming off that oxidized meat over on the side there, just some of that brown stuff. And it just doesn't look good, and plus I'm still trying to make it aerodynamic. So again, coming up here around the point, as you can see, trimming off, working on a little bit of the aerodynamics. And that's going to make good sense to you here in a minute when you see that, because we're going to give you a good look at this. Just take it slow. Don't trim any more than you really need to. And again, the trimmings in the big bowl, they do not go to waste in my house. I'd either make sausage with them, and I'll make 1 or 2 batches a year is about all I do because I don't cook a whole lot of briskets. Or in this case, this one's going to be rendered down into fat. And there's videos on YouTube on how to do that. I get it to where it's almost frozen, put it through the grinder like I'm grinding ground beef, and then I render it down on the stove and then pour it off of the crusties, the crispies that are going to form in there. And now you have nice, good beef tallow that you can use on your brisket. So now we're looking at some stuff. This would be the meat side. And closest to you right now is the flat, the wider part. And I've got some area right there in the center that's like this silver skin. And anyway, silver skin. Yeah, that was good, Chad. Silver skin. And so we're trimming that off of there because sometimes that can get kind of nasty when you're chewing it up. So we try to get some of the tougher stuff off, but you can see I'm being real careful not to get down in the meat. There's a knife mark from where they cut it. Again, at the processing plant, you're going to see random cuts in there and things sometimes. It's just they get in a hurry, and you can't see that when it's in that cryo bag. So some of them you can. Once in a while you can see a mistake through there, but the way they do it, it's kind of hard to tell. So here we go, trimming silver skin. And just kind of, you can see how that follows in there. And I'm just looking for any little bits that are loose hangers and anything that I can get off without digging into that meat. I just want to try not to dig into that meat. If you do, don't panic. It's no big deal. But there we go. We're getting some of the silver skin off of there, bringing it on down. Nice little trim. You notice how I'm kind of keeping the blade flat, and I know this is probably not the most ideal blade to be using for some people because I've seen all kinds of knives used on YouTube. I just love this knife. I like the way it flexes, and I can really use it effectively. So here we are. We're going for some more aerodynamics there, going for some more fat, some of that hard fat on the side. Here's some loose pieces coming up with some more of that good old silver skin. I don't get 100% of the silver skin off, but to a level that I feel good with, okay? Now we're looking at this flat. Part of it's thin and part of it's thick. So where it's really thin right here, I'm going to actually take off a good bit of that thin part, but I'm going to curve it around. I'm going to give it some aerodynamic properties. I'm going to give it a little bit of a gentle curve there for that smoke to come around, okay? And that gets it to where it's not so thin. And again, on this pointed end, to keep it aerodynamic, I'm going to cut that off. Now, a little word about the grain in the meat and trying to know where to slice it from. Some people will actually put a little cut on the end of the flat, like a straight cut, that is a guide to tell them where to start slicing against the grain. Because once it's smoked and it's barked up and it looks beautiful, you cannot always see those lines in the meat of the grain. So it really is beneficial to some people to cut a little line or a notch at one end. And that's where I'm going to start making my first cut. I don't do that. I just make a note of, where it is. And so I've flipped it back over to the fat side now. Again, getting some excess fat off. Again, rounding the corners. Just making sure we're aerodynamic. So just some final little trim on the corners there and just thinning out a little bit of that thick fat. But again, I like to keep the fat on there, not only to protect the meat, but, don't let my doctor hear this, but I like to eat the fat too. A nice little bite of fat on there really does, it's very pleasing to the palate. It's got that salt, the pepper, it's got the grease from the natural fats and the juices. You got the meat and that little bit of fat. It's like grandma's pot roast, okay? That's what I'm going for, is grandma's pot roast. However, it's on a smoker, but it's still slow cooked beef with all its fatty goodness. If it's too lean, it's a little hard to eat to me. So I like to keep a little bit of the fat on anyway. That's how we like it. So when we slice our brisket, when you put it on your plate, you have the option of taking the fat off. Now we've got our shape. You can take a look at the grain of the meat, make a note of it to where you're going to make your trim there. You're going to start trimming. There's where the grain's going. And that's it. You're going to start slicing against the grain the next day. And that's your trimmed brisket. One little last look over to get a few things done, and that's it. So good luck with your first brisket, Rob. I know you're going to do great, buddy. Enjoy.